The morning after my wife died, her son asked how quickly I could move out of the house I had spent 15 years rebuilding. He did not ask whether I had slept. He did not ask whether I had eaten. He stood in the driveway beside his aunt and uncle, jingling the keys to the truck I had bought him, and said, "Mom's real family needs to protect what she left behind." 48 hours earlier, I had been holding his mother's hand in an intensive care room while she begged me not to give up on him. At the memorial dinner, they seated me beside the kitchen door and cropped me out of every photograph. On Facebook, my stepson wrote, "Blood carries a legacy forward." He forgot that my hands had built the house in the picture. My savings had kept his mother's studio alive, and my name was on every bill he expected me to keep paying. 3 months later, they invited me to Thanksgiving and placed a folder beneath my plate. Inside was a list of everything they still wanted from me. That was the night I finally understood my promise to my wife did not require me to become her family's servant. My name is Thomas Mercer. I was 57 when I lost my wife, Rebecca, and discovered grief does not always bring families closer. Sometimes it removes the one person who kept everyone's ugliness behind a closed door. Rebecca and I lived outside Greenville, South Carolina, in a renovated farmhouse at the edge of 12 wooded acres. The original structure had sagging floors, a leaking tin roof, and a kitchen small enough to touch both walls at once. Over the years, I rebuilt it room by room. I added a wraparound porch, a stone fireplace, a bright studio for Rebecca, and a workshop at the back of the property where I made custom tables. I had been a finish carpenter since I was 19. By the time I met Rebecca, I owned a small but respected woodworking company called Mercer and Pine. I was not rich in the way her relatives admired, but I had land, steady work, loyal employees, and enough savings to live without pretending. Rebecca came from a family that treated pretending like a second profession. Her older sister, Judith, wore pearls to backyard cookouts and asked people what neighborhood they lived in before asking what they did for fun. Her brother, Miles, had changed careers 6 times but introduced himself as an entrepreneur. Their mother, Patricia, had spent decades serving on charity boards and correcting everyone's grammar. They called themselves the Ashford family, though Rebecca had taken my name after we married. They never let her forget it. Rebecca had one child from her first marriage, Caleb. He was 14 when I met him, tall for his age, angry at everyone, and certain every adult eventually left. His biological father had disappeared to Florida when Caleb was 7 and communicated through late birthday texts and occasional promises. I knew better than to arrive pretending I could replace anyone. I drove Caleb to soccer practice, helped him rebuild an old dirt bike, and showed up. That was all. At first, he barely spoke to me. Then, one winter evening, his school bus broke down 2 counties away during an ice storm. Rebecca was sick with the flu, so I drove nearly 2 hours, found him standing beneath a gas station awning, and handed him my dry coat. He wore it home without saying thank you. The next morning, he left a mug of coffee beside my workbench. That was how Caleb loved people then, indirectly, as if gratitude might create a debt. For several years, we did well. Not perfectly, but honestly. He called me Tom, never Dad. I never pushed. I paid for his community college classes after he decided a 4-year school was not for him. When he quit halfway through the second semester, I found him a paid apprenticeship with a cabinet shop in Spartanburg. He lasted 11 days and said the owner treated him like labor. I reminded him that he was labor. He did not speak to me for a week. Rebecca defended him more often than she should have. He has been abandoned enough, she would say. He needs to know home is safe. I agreed, but safety slowly became exemption. When Caleb wrecked his first car after drinking at a party, I paid the repair shop and made him work weekends in my warehouse. Rebecca secretly returned the money he gave me because she hated seeing him ashamed. When he moved into an apartment he could not afford, Patricia and Judith said a young man from their family deserved something respectable. I covered 3 months of rent because Rebecca cried and promised it was temporary. When Caleb turned 25, I helped him start a home staging delivery business using one of my company trucks. 6 months later, the business had vanished, but the truck had somehow become his personal vehicle. Every rescue was described as one final chance. Every final chance became the floor beneath the next mistake. The Ashfords encouraged it because they loved telling people Caleb was building something. At Thanksgiving dinners, Patricia praised his ambition while I arrived early to repair cabinet doors and stayed late to load dishes. Judith once asked whether I ever felt threatened by Caleb eventually taking over Rebecca's creative legacy. I looked around the dining room I had rebuilt after a pipe burst and said, "Not especially." She smiled without humor. "You craftsmen are wonderfully practical." Craftsman was her polite word for hired help. Rebecca saw the insults, but she avoided confrontation. She would squeeze my knee beneath the table and whisper on the drive home that her family did not understand what I had built. I told her I did not care. That was not entirely true. I cared because her silence taught them they could disrespect me without risking access to anything I provided. Still, I loved her. Rebecca was warm, impulsive, and more generous with affection than judgment. She ran a small interior design studio in downtown Greenville called Hearthline Interiors. She had exquisite taste and terrible financial instincts. I managed the invoices, covered short months, negotiated with suppliers, and built custom pieces for her clients at cost. Online, the studio appeared elegant and successful. Behind the photographs, I paid the insurance, rent, and payroll whenever a client delayed payment. Rebecca always thanked me. Her family acted as though the studio's survival proved the Ashfords possessed natural business talent. Caleb eventually became Creative Operations Director, a title Rebecca invented because he refused warehouse work. His duties included visiting job sites, posting videos, and choosing restaurants for client lunches. He earned more than 2 employees who actually measured rooms and managed orders. I objected once. Rebecca said the position gave him confidence. "Confidence without competence is expensive," I replied. She cried, and I apologized. That was our weakness as a couple. I was willing to carry almost anything to stop Rebecca from feeling torn between me and her son. Caleb learned that his mother's tears could move my boundaries farther than his effort ever could. The illness came without warning. Rebecca developed what seemed like a respiratory infection after returning from a design conference in Atlanta. Within 4 days, she was admitted to the hospital. The infection spread into her bloodstream. Her kidneys struggled. Doctors spoke in careful sentences that ended before the fear did. I lived beside her bed for 9 days. My friend Marcus brought clean clothes and sandwiches. My foreman, Louise, kept the workshop running. Patricia visited twice, but complained that hospital parking made her anxious. Judith arrived with flowers, took a photograph of herself holding Rebecca's hand, posted it with a prayer emoji, and left before the next medication round. Miles said hospitals made him uncomfortable. Caleb came late most evenings, usually after asking whether I had heard anything about the studio accounts. On the 9th night, Rebecca became strangely alert. The nurse had warned me that sometimes patients briefly rose toward the surface before leaving. Rebecca asked me to remove the oxygen mask for a moment. I hesitated, then helped her. "Caleb," she whispered. "He's coming," I said. He had texted that he was 10 minutes away nearly an hour earlier. Rebecca squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "Don't abandon him." I wanted to tell her Caleb was 31. I wanted to remind her how many jobs, bills, apologies, and second chances had already been placed beneath him. But the woman I loved was dying, and she was asking for peace, not an audit. "I won't abandon him," I said. "I'll give him every honest chance I can." She relaxed. "Promise?" "I promise." Caleb arrived 20 minutes after she could no longer speak. Rebecca died shortly before dawn, with my hand around hers and her son asleep in a chair near the window, his phone still glowing in his lap. I did not resent him in that moment. Grief makes everyone small. I covered him with my jacket and sat beside the bed until the nurse returned. The funeral took place 5 days later at a white-steepled church near Traveler's Rest. Rebecca had designed flowers for half the congregation's weddings, so the sanctuary overflowed. People told me we had been a beautiful couple. Others told Caleb he was now the man of the family. Judith organized the memorial slideshow. Of the 80 photographs, I appeared in 6. In 3, half my body was cropped. Caleb stood beside his mother in nearly every frame, even photographs from vacations I had paid for and taken. At the reception, Patricia thanked everyone for supporting Rebecca's true legacy, her family, and her work. I was standing close enough to hear, and somehow too far away to count. Caleb barely spoke to me until we returned to the farmhouse. Then, before guests had finished carrying casseroles into the kitchen, he asked me to step outside. Judith and Miles followed. They formed a small semicircle in the driveway, while I stood beside my truck wearing the suit I had buried my wife in. Caleb jingled the keys to the company pickup I had allowed him to use. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "Not today. It has to be today." Mom's studio, the house, the land her family needs clarity. I looked at him. The house and land are mine. Judith crossed her arms. Rebecca lived here for 15 years. Yes. Then morally it is part of her estate. Miles nodded as if morality were a property document. Caleb said he planned to continue Hearthline and protect his mother's vision. He thought the farmhouse should become a family gathering place and client showcase. I asked where he expected me to live. You have that cabin near Lake Jokasee, he said. I had purchased a small fishing cabin years before the marriage. It might be good for you to have a fresh start. My wife had been dead 5 days, and her son was offering me exile from the home where her slippers still sat beside the bed. And the workshop? I asked. Caleb glanced toward the long building behind the house. That should stay connected to the studio. Mom's clients expect custom work. Who will make it? We'll hire people. Luis and 9 craftsmen had worked beside me for years. To Caleb, they were interchangeable hands. Judith stepped closer and softened her voice. Thomas, nobody is trying to be cruel. You had a meaningful chapter with Rebecca, but blood has to protect blood now. A meaningful chapter. 15 years reduced to a chapter because they needed the house after the book closed. I thought of Rebecca's last request. Don't abandon him. I also thought of my answer. Every honest chance. If that's what Caleb wants, I said, he can continue the studio. His face brightened. And the house? No. The smile vanished. I continued. You can use the downtown studio name, client list, furniture displays, and the pickup for 30 days while you arrange your own transportation. The workshop, land, and farmhouse remain mine. I will finish orders already paid for. After that, Hearthline buys work from Mercer and Pine like any other design firm. Judith called that vindictive. I told her it was business. Caleb said his mother intended him to have everything. Your mother intended you to have a chance, I replied. That is what I am offering. He threw the keys against my truck. Keep your charity. Then he walked back into my house and told guests I was already trying to dismantle Rebecca's legacy. That evening, Judith posted a photograph of Caleb, Patricia, Miles, and herself standing on my porch beneath a caption. Blood carries her legacy forward. I was inside washing Rebecca's favorite teacup because nobody else knew it could not go in the dishwasher. The weeks after the funeral were quieter than grief should have allowed. Caleb moved into Patricia's guest house and told people I had forced him from his childhood home, though he had never lived in the farmhouse. Judith began sending group messages about protecting Rebecca's vision. Miles asked whether I would continue covering the studio's downtown rent until everyone stabilized. Patricia called and said Rebecca would be ashamed to see me using money as leverage against her son. I listened to each request and heard the same belief beneath it. My love for Rebecca had become a family account they expected to remain open after her death. I paid the studio's employees through the end of the month because they had mortgages and had done nothing wrong. I completed 3 client projects Rebecca had personally promised. I transferred her design files, passwords, and scheduled appointments to Caleb. I gave him a list of suppliers, outstanding invoices, and employee responsibilities. Then I stopped. I did not sabotage the studio. I simply removed the invisible labor that had kept it appearing effortless. Caleb announced online that he had taken the position of president and creative director. He posted a photograph in Rebecca's office wearing a navy blazer, one hand resting on her desk. The caption read, "Stepping forward to preserve what my mother built." Comments called him brave. Judith wrote, "She always knew you were destined to lead." Nobody mentioned the man who had covered payroll 6 times that year. At first, Caleb believed leadership meant choosing fabrics and attending lunches. He ignored supplier emails, delayed deposits, and promised delivery dates without asking the craftsman. He hired a friend to manage social media and gave him a title but no clear duties. When Lewis quoted market price for a custom staircase, Caleb called me furious. "You used to make these for Mom at cost. I made them for my wife's business. This is still her business. It is now your business. You promised to take care of me." The words stopped me. Rebecca's request had already become a weapon. "Taking care of you does not mean removing every consequence," I said. "It means giving you the truth before the bill arrives." He hung up. 2 days later, Patricia called to say Caleb had not slept and was overwhelmed. She suggested I quietly continue managing vendor payments while allowing him to remain publicly in charge. "He needs confidence right now," she said. "He needs confidence." That sounds exactly like something a stepfather would say. The insult was supposed to place me outside the family. Instead, it clarified that I had been expected to perform a father's labor without receiving a father's place. Then perhaps his biological family should help, I replied. Patricia called me cold. I ended the conversation. The hardest part was not the studio or money. It was losing access to Ava, Caleb's 8-year-old daughter. Her mother, Hannah, had separated from Caleb 2 years earlier, but kept a civil relationship with Rebecca and me. Ava spent weekends at the farmhouse, planted tomatoes with me, and called my workshop the Wood Hospital because broken chairs came in and working ones went out. After the funeral, Caleb told Hannah I was unstable with grief and asked her not to bring Ava to my property. Hannah did not believe him completely, but she wanted to avoid conflict. For 6 weeks, I saw Ava only through photographs online. In one, she stood beside Caleb at the studio wearing Rebecca's measuring tape around her neck. The caption said, 3 generations of Ashford design, my last name, my workshop, and my relationship with her had been erased in one sentence. I considered fighting publicly, then heard Rebecca's voice reminding me that Ava should never become a prize adults pulled between them. I sent Hannah one message. My door is open whenever it is healthy for Ava. I will not ask her to choose. Hannah replied with a heart. That was all. Grief settled into the farmhouse through ordinary objects. Rebecca's mug beside the sink, her reading glasses on the porch table, a scarf hanging behind the bedroom door. At night, I sometimes woke expecting to hear her moving in the kitchen. Instead, my phone would glow with another message from Caleb, asking for passwords, money, contacts, or explanations he had ignored the first time. I answered factual questions. I did not answer insults. Marcus told me I was being too generous. Luis said Caleb had visited the workshop and spoken to the men like they were furniture. He called us production assets, Luis said. I told him I have a name. I apologized. Luis shook his head. Don't apologize for him. Just stop protecting him from who he is. That sentence followed me. By summer, Hearthline had lost 2 major clients. One left after Caleb missed a site meeting because he was attending a golf tournament. Another refused to pay for furniture delivered in the wrong finish. Caleb blamed the employees, then fired the studio manager who had kept Rebecca organized for 7 years. Judith posted about the courage required to modernize a family company. Miles suggested moving the studio into my farmhouse to save rent. Patricia began telling church friends that grief had made me controlling and that I was withholding resources Rebecca would have wanted Caleb to use. I did not respond online. A public argument would have turned Rebecca's death into content. I wanted to keep one part of her memory outside their performance. Then, in early September, Hannah called. Ava had been asking why Grandpa Tom no longer loved her. I sat down at the workshop desk. Who told her that? Caleb said you chose the business over the family. Anger moved through me so quickly I had to grip the edge of the desk. I asked Hannah to bring Ava for lunch if she felt comfortable. She agreed. Ava arrived that Saturday, carrying a small paper bag. Inside was Rebecca's measuring tape. Daddy says Grandma's things belong to our real family, she said. But Grandma gave this to me, and you are real too. I had to look away. We made grilled cheese, watered the tomatoes, and spent 2 hours repairing a dollhouse staircase. I did not criticize her father. When she asked why we had not seen each other, I said adults sometimes confuse love with winning. Are you mad at Daddy? She asked. I am sad about some choices he made. Does that mean you stopped being family? Not to you. She nodded with a serious relief only children show when an adult gives a simple answer. Before leaving, she hugged me and whispered, I knew you still loved me. After the car disappeared, I stood in the driveway and realized Caleb's behavior was no longer merely entitlement. He was using a child's fear to punish me for setting boundaries. That was the day I stopped asking whether preserving peace was worth the cost. 3 weeks later, Caleb invited me to Thanksgiving at Patricia's house. The message read, Ava wants everyone together. Mom would have wanted healing. Rebecca had been dead 8 months. Every invitation from the Ashfords now used either her memory or Ava's love as a key. I replied that I would attend for 2 hours if nobody discussed money, the studio, the farmhouse, or my relationship with Ava. Caleb responded with a thumbs up. Patricia wrote, Of course, family first. I knew better than to trust the promise, but Ava called me herself and asked if I would sit beside her. I said yes. Patricia's house sat behind iron gates in a golf course community outside Greenville. Rebecca had hated the formal dining room because nobody could relax in it. That Thanksgiving, the table was arranged for 20 people with gold-rimmed plates, place cards, and candles tall enough to hide several relatives. A framed photograph of Rebecca stood at the center. In it, she was laughing in my workshop, though the picture had been cropped so only her hands and the edge of a table remained. Judith greeted me with an embrace designed for witnesses. Miles asked whether I still lived alone in that enormous place. Patricia said I looked tired. Caleb arrived late in the company pickup, even though the 30-day use period had ended months earlier. He had ignored every message asking him to return it. Ava ran to me and wrapped both arms around my waist. Caleb watched without smiling. My place card was at the far end beside a folding service table. Ava's seat was near Caleb and Patricia. She moved her card next to mine. Patricia told her seating plans existed for a reason. Ava said, "So do Grandpa's." Nobody laughed except Miles, who stopped when Patricia glared at him. Before dinner, Judith gathered everyone near the fireplace for a family photograph. She placed Patricia in the center, Caleb beside Rebecca's portrait, and Ava in front. I remained near the doorway. Judith waved impatiently. "Thomas, could you take it?" Ava looked over. "Grandpa should be in it." Judith said the photograph was for the Ashford family Christmas card. "Then I should not take it either," I replied. I handed the phone to Miles and walked toward the dining room. Behind me, Patricia whispered, "Always making a point." I was not making a point. I was refusing to help create another image that used my labor while removing my presence. Dinner began with Patricia offering a prayer about forgiveness, legacy, and those willing to put family above pride. Caleb kept his eyes closed longer than anyone. Ava held my hand beneath the table. For 20 minutes, conversation remained safe. People discussed football, school, and holiday travel. Then Judith asked how Mercer and Pine was doing. I said, "Well." She smiled. "Wonderful. Then you are in a position to help preserve Rebecca's studio." I set down my fork. "We agreed not to discuss that." Patricia said, "Nobody is discussing business. We are discussing family survival." Miles slid a folder from the service table and placed it beside my plate. The setup was so obvious that I almost admired it. Inside was a typed list titled Rebecca's Legacy Plan. It asked me to allow Hearthline to use my workshop without charge for 3 years, continue producing furniture at cost, transfer the company pickup permanently to Caleb, cover 6 months of studio rent, and add Caleb's name to the farmhouse property to ensure Ava's future connection. At the bottom was a line for my signature. They had transformed my marriage into an invoice. I closed the folder. "No." Caleb's face hardened. "You did not even read it." "I read enough." Patricia said Rebecca would have wanted the farmhouse protected for her descendants. "Ava is welcome there," I said. "That does not require giving Caleb my property." Judith leaned forward. "You have no biological children. What exactly are you preserving it for?" The words landed harder than I expected. "Because I had no biological child. My home was apparently waiting to be claimed by someone whose blood was more legitimate than my life." "My future," I said. "My employees. My retirement. Whatever I decide." Miles scoffed. "You're 57, Tom. How much future do you think you need?" Ava looked at him confused. Caleb said quietly, "Mom asked you to take care of me." I looked across the candles at the boy I had collected from an icy gas station, the teenager whose college bills I had paid, the man whose rent, truck, jobs, and failures I had repeatedly absorbed. "She asked me not to abandon you. I gave you the studio, the client list, the employees, the files, and every honest chance to learn. You rejected every form of help that required effort." Caleb's cheeks reddened. "You gave me a failing company after pulling out everything valuable. I gave you the company your mother owned. The valuable parts you are referring to were my land, my workshop, my money, and my labor." Patricia interrupted. "This is why Rebecca worried about you. Everything with you becomes transactional." I almost laughed. They had placed a 5-item demand beneath my plate, yet I was transactional for reading it aloud. Judith said I had benefited from Rebecca's family name for 15 years. Luis's words returned to me. "Stop protecting him from who he is." I turned to Caleb. "Did you know this folder would be here?" He looked toward Patricia. That was answer enough. Ava removed her hand from his. "Daddy, you said Grandpa was coming because we missed him." Caleb told her adults were talking. She replied, "You lied." The word entered the room cleanly. Caleb snapped that she was too young to understand. Ava began crying. I stood, moved to her chair, and knelt. None of this is your fault. Patricia said I was creating a scene. No, I replied without looking at her. The scene was prepared before I arrived. Caleb accused me of humiliating him in front of the family. I asked whether he had considered how it felt to be asked to surrender my home at the Thanksgiving table, while Rebecca's photograph watched. His voice rose. You were never really one of us. You married my mother. That does not make you an Ashford. The room became completely still. There it was. 15 years of suspicion finally spoken without decoration. I stood slowly. You are right, I said. I am not an Ashford. Patricia looked relieved, believing I had surrendered. I continued. I am the man who loved your mother when she was scared, sat beside her when she was dying, paid the bills when her studio could not, raised you when your father disappeared, and kept this family comfortable while you called me an outsider. I do not need your last name to know what I contributed, Caleb said. Then prove you loved her. Sign it. The cruelty of the sentence took my breath for 1 second. Prove you love the dead woman by giving the living son everything he wants. I thought of Rebecca's cold fingers around mine. I thought of every time she had asked me to rescue him because she feared losing his affection. Then I understood the promise differently. Giving Caleb exactly what he demanded would not take care of him. It would preserve the part of him that had never learned love could survive the word no. I closed the folder and pushed it toward him. This is the final time your mother's name will be used to purchase my obedience. Patricia began crying. Judith called me heartless. Miles said I would die alone in a house too large for me. I picked up my coat. Ava ran toward me. Caleb caught her shoulder and told her to stay. She shouted, "He is my grandpa." Hannah, who had been seated quietly near the opposite end, stood and removed Caleb's hand. She can say goodbye. Ava hugged me. I told her I loved her and would call the next day. Then I looked at Hannah. She nodded, letting me know she understood. Caleb said if I walked out, I would never see Ava again. Hannah answered before I could. You do not get to use our daughter as payment. That was the moment the room shifted. For the first time, someone inside Caleb's generation refused the family script. I left without dessert. Outside, cold rain had begun tapping against the windshield. My hands shook when I started the truck, but my decision did not. I had not broken my promise to Rebecca. I had finally stopped confusing rescue with love. The next morning, I sent Caleb one message. The studio accounts, files, and remaining inventory are yours. The pickup must be returned by Friday. Mercer and Pine will accept future work only at normal rates. Do not contact me through Ava. He replied with 6 paragraphs accusing me of betraying Rebecca, followed by a final sentence asking whether I could cover payroll one more time. I did not answer. The truck appeared in my driveway Thursday night with the fuel light on and a dent along the passenger door. No note, no apology. I repaired the dent myself because some habits leave slowly, but I did not send him the bill or the truck again. Hearthline closed 4 months later. Not because I attacked it, but because Caleb continued spending energy on appearances instead of clients. He moved the studio into a cheaper office, sold the showroom furniture, and told people I had destroyed his mother's dream. I stopped correcting strangers. People who wanted the truth eventually noticed that the craftsmen still worked, clients still received their orders, and Rebecca's designs were being preserved in the archive I created with her former studio manager. The dream had not died. The entitlement surrounding it had. Hannah kept her word. Ava visited every other Saturday. We built birdhouses, planted another tomato garden, and created a small reading bench from cedar Rebecca had selected years earlier. I never made Ava carry messages. When she asked whether Caleb and I would become friends again, I said, maybe, if both people learn how to tell the truth and respect the word no. Months later, Caleb appeared at the workshop without Patricia or Judith. He looked tired and drove an old sedan. For once, he carried no folder. He said losing the studio had shown him how much work had been happening around him while he collected praise. He apologized for the Thanksgiving demand, for using Ava, and for telling me I was not family. Then he asked whether I could give him a job. I told him I would give him an application. His face tightened, but he took it. No title? He asked. No title. No special salary? No. And if I mess up, you correct it or you leave. He looked toward the workshop where Luis and the others were working. Mom would hate seeing me start at the bottom. Your mother would hate seeing us lie to you again. Caleb nodded. He returned the application the next day. He lasted longer than 11 days this time. I did not call him son again immediately, and he did not call me dad. Repair, like fine woodworking, cannot be rushed because someone dislikes the visible crack. Patricia and Judith remained outside my life. Their Christmas card arrived with a photograph from Thanksgiving that cropped out the empty chair beside Ava. I threw it away unopened the following year. I planted a maple near the porch for Rebecca and placed her favorite chair beneath it. Sometimes I sit there at sunset and tell her about Ava, the workshop, and Caleb's slow progress. I no longer apologize for keeping the promise differently than she imagined. Taking care of someone does not always mean cushioning every fall. Sometimes it means refusing to become the floor. I spent 15 years believing love was proven by how much disrespect I could absorb without leaving. Now I know self-worth begins when you stop asking people who benefit from your silence to confirm your place in the family. I did not take revenge on the Ashfords. I simply removed my money, labor, home, and dignity from a relationship that treated all four as inherited property. Whatever collapsed afterward had never been mine to hold up. So tell me honestly, if your late spouse asked you to care for an entitled adult child who later tried to push you out of your own home, would you keep sacrificing to honor the promise? Or would you decide that the most loving thing left was to let him finally carry the weight of his own choices?